CrossPolitic begins in 3, 2, 1.
Have a heart that breaks for a dying city.
Stop cursing your future.
Is not true.
For all intents and purposes, I am a woman.
Government, the political system has ultimate supremacy. Jesus is King of Kings, and it's about time our nation return in humble submission to his lordship.
You are not protecting women. You are authorizing the destruction of 500,000 little women every year.
But I didn't start it. But sir, with all due respect, that's the argument of a 5-year-old. I didn't start it.
Right, when the Spirit comes upon people, they go to war, they go to battle, and the enemies of God are driven back and they're slaughtered.
You are listening to CrossPolitic with Gabe Wrench, the Water Boy, Pastor Toby Sumter, and the Chocolate Knox.
Hello, y'all. Welcome to CrossPolitic. Thank you for joining us, and a special welcome to New St. Andrews. Can we get a hand?
Wow.
Yeah.
They showed up.
Yeah. Hey. This is CrossPolitic Special Edition. We got a couple guests that we need to get to. Live, and we're live. We're live streamed. This is going to drop on Sunday night also on our podcast. To get to a couple of our guests, first we have my pastor. He doesn't recognize me, but I recognize him. Pastor Doug Wilson. Thank you for joining us, Doug.
I got your back, Pastor. I got your back, Pastor.
Notice that he came back.
It was the hat.
Doesn't recognize the hat.
We'll get you one, too, if you want.
And then we got my brother from Texas, Dr. Voddie Baucham. Welcome. Thank you, Dr. Voddie Baucham.
Hey.
Amen. Thank you. So from Zambia, you came here you flew into the States about a week and a half ago, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I did.
You've been busy.
A little bit.
You've been really busy. Yeah. G3 conference, right?
Yeah, a couple other conferences.
Yeah, a couple other conferences too.
And then up here and
the new
and then leave on Monday. Yep.
New grandbaby?
Yeah, I got a 7-month-old grandson, our first grandson. So
wow.
I got to spend some time with him.
Congrats.
And his parents, but you know.
Yeah, but you don't care about them anymore, do you?
Just give me the grandbaby.
It's the grandbaby.
So yeah, it's been busy. I leave on Monday.
To go back to Zambia.
Heading back to Zambia, yeah.
Well, we're going to try and drain you before you leave. Get as much as we can get out of you.
Okay, yes.
So I went and worked out with Voddie this morning. He wanted to go work out at North Idaho Athletic Club, and so I woke up, took him to the gym, and then he went and worked out and put all the big weights on the plates and everything. And I went and ran on the treadmill for about 10 minutes, and I disappeared in the back room and just got on my cell phone for about 10 minutes. About an hour, actually.
You're promoting the show.
He kept working.
You're promoting the show. That's what you were doing.
That's what I'm doing.
You're promoting CrossPolitic. That's right.
Yeah. So before we get into this, you can find out more about us at crosspolitic.com. You can follow our podcast. You can email us, memo@crosspolitic.com.
That's right, yeah.
So we're here talking today particularly about the whole issue of the church and race, and maybe even more specifically, race in American culture. And we just want to talk. We want to talk about this. There's a lot of talk already about this issue.
Yes.
And I don't know. There's a lot of words, a lot of thoughts. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of clarity about this issue at all.
Well, and I think a lot of times too, people have been just almost too nice about the subject. You know, I feel like that
we should call each other more names.
Yes, more name calling, and I don't find that I have to use my sanctification enough in the conversation when it comes to race.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that no one is saying anything that's offensive or challenges me in a way that's like I really need to think about that.
But there's racists everywhere. Aren't you always offended?
I am now.
Are you white-splaining Chocolate Knox right now?
Well, no, I feel like we need to have a family meeting.
Okay.
Right? I feel like we need to say, okay, you know what? This is going on over here. This is going over there. But we're all family. We need to come and have that meeting, and we need to just say some stuff to each other that we're probably not going to like.
Okay, let me have it. Let me have it right now.
Well, no, but to me, that's the essence of what's been wrong lately. We have people who have been doing things together in the name of unity in the kingdom of the gospel, and when certain events take place, if you give the wrong answer, all of the rest of that unity no longer matters. you are simply labeled and castigated and
you
thrown
took the
aside.
air out of the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the wrong answer?
Well,
you have a lot of wrong answers compared. If you let your critics.
So Chalk's been telling us about angry Voddie.
Yeah, so
bad Voddie.
Bad Voddie. But bad Voddie and angry Voddie kind of come at the same time, though, don't they?
But here's the thing. The scary thing about bad Voddie is that he's not angry.
Oh.
Yeah.
He's not?
No, he's not.
Well, that's a little scarier.
David's been slandering you.
Well, because I call him angry Voddie. And I told everybody, I said, I want to talk to, so I'll change it, not angry Voddie. I want to talk to bad Voddie.
Yeah.
Because I know bad Voddie just says stuff.
Yeah, he
just gets in there, he says what he wants to say, doesn't apologize about it.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the guy who...
Like I said, sometimes I'm not sure that brother's saved.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But he needs to be invited to the conversation. We need him to show up.
I'm still trying to evangelize him.
I want to talk to that guy. But that's the guy I want to talk to because
so when you say wrong answers, though, you mean you're talking about what they don't want to hear. You're talking about people who don't want to hear particular answers. Is that what you mean?
It's not necessarily that people don't want to hear particular answers. It's that there are certain rules and certain assumptions that are to be observed and accepted, and when they are not, then there's this sort of automatic castigation.
Can you give us an example?
For example, something there's a shooting, and a black person is shot, and all of a sudden it's, well, see, here we go again. And if your response,
without any details,
and if your
he was shot because he's black,
and if your response is, well, we don't even know that, and this could have been something that was completely justifiable. All of a sudden, they look at you like you stink.
Yeah.
You
didn't give the right answer.
You didn't give the right answer.
Well, and that, I think part of that gets to the heart of some of the issue here is just a real concern for biblical justice. Like, I remember,
or lack thereof,
lack of biblical justice. I remember Doug pointing this out a while ago, where like Michael Brown in the Ferguson case seemed to be the thug in the situation, but then you go to New York where Eric Garner was, and it was more like probably the cops were the thugs who were tackling this guy for selling cigarettes on the street.
Yeah,
like, right.
Yeah,
and to being able to draw biblical justice distinctions and all this, I think would kill a lot of the presuppositions that if you don't sign off on, then you're done.
Yes.
Well, if someone describes a scenario to you, a teenager is shot at a mall in the parking lot by 3 cops, and you're sitting back and you don't know what to think about it because you do not yet know what color everybody was. Mm-hmm. Right. Then you are the problem. Right. You should be able to determine what the just response was without knowing the colors,
pigmentation.
Yeah, if you
where's his organ?
If you don't know
where's his organ,
I don't know if I agree with him yet.
If you don't know what side you're on, then until you get the colors straight, and that does sometimes guilty whites want to be automatically on the side of the black, whoever that is,
right?
And then if you're a black man wearing a blue uniform, the blue uniform trumps your blackness. The rules are very complicated, but that's the problem. Biblical justice, the cliche is the statue or the image we have of justice blindfolded. That's the thing that justice is not supposed to be looking at.
That wouldn't be so much of a problem to me if it wasn't, okay, so you have the church, right, that you expect the church people to think one way. We're Christians, we're evangelicals, we think one way about the situation, but the problem, it seems that the church people are thinking more of the problem, at least especially in a lot of the black community, black culture. Right now, it's if somebody was shot in that situation, they are waiting to hear if he was black because then they know how to judge a situation. Why don't we have more unity in the church when it comes to situations? Why aren't we thinking more biblical about this?
We have different lenses. And as black people, there are many things. Again, I was born in 1969. And so my parents,
he's a grandpa.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
it's okay.
I earned this.
Okay,
I earned this.
You do know
right
we can't
here.
hit on this show.
Yeah,
Right?
I earned this.
Where's Chocolate Knox is used just for men.
No, yeah. No, I earned this, Greg. And so
You stay over there.
And so
It's Beijing. It's Beijing. You know what I'm talking about.
And so, again, my parents, children of the 50s, it was a very different country then.
Yeah.
And so things that I was taught, things that I experienced shaped the way I interpret events.
Yeah.
And that's true for all of us.
Right.
Yeah. Those things shape the way that we interpret events. And that's not necessarily a problem. It's not necessarily a problem that when I see something, it's shaped by all of those things. The problem is if I'm not recognizing that my perspective is shaped by my experiences, and then someone else who doesn't look like me, their, understanding of this event is shaped by their perspective. When my automatic assumption is you are an evil person because this perspective doesn't line up with my perspective. See, that's where we run into the problem. I don't think there's a problem that we have different sort of visceral reactions to certain things. The problem is when we judge others because they don't share it.
Do you think the brothers on the left are doing that? Or our Christian brothers on the opposite side are doing that? The Reformed Christian brothers. This is not like, the liberal Christian brothers. These are the Reformed Christian brothers who are saying, like, you guys don't get it. And they're not judging and saying, oh, you're evil. They're just saying you don't understand. I mean, a good example of that would be Jamar Tisby from Reform African American Network, right? Right after the election, he said, I'm afraid to go to my church, my white church, and fellowship with my white brothers right now. And basically it was because of the fact that they don't understand the position that I'm in. They don't understand what a Trump election means for me and for my culture and for other people who are minorities. And I'm going to go fellowship with a group of people who are celebrating what seems to be like a demise for me. How am I going to engage with them and not look like the jerk because I snap out and be like, what's wrong with y'all?
Yeah. And 8 years ago, the shoe was on the other foot. Where was Jamar?
What shoe?
As far as when Obama was elected, there were a lot of people who felt a lot of angst then. But those people who felt angst.
Voddie, that was our first black president.
He was, listen.
He's from Kenya.
Here's another problem.
We only had one.
We got a burger on the stage?
Can we get one?
Yeah. Well, he was our first bi-ethnic president. It's interesting. It's interesting how, black people seem to have short memories sometimes. Why do we call a person who is bi-ethnic black? Well, because it has historically been understood that whiteness is pure and blackness is a perversion of pure whiteness.
That's right.
And so for a person who's bi-ethnic to be called black is really a racist insult. Okay. Because again, he's as white as he is black, but you can't call him white because white must be pure.
Right.
You see,
right.
All of a sudden, that's not a problem anymore. Barack Obama's our first bi-ethnic president.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think though the opposite. So you know this, I'm working hard to think about this on the other side. So, yeah. But I think so. Being in the culture, living in the culture, the response to that would easily be, he's black because white people didn't want him. Right? Like that. What
do you mean? White people fawned over him.
Yeah.
No.
His entire life.
No, I'm not just talking about him. I'm talking about the whole idea of why the mixed kids, mixed people weren't accepted in the white culture.
Yeah, the white people wouldn't have wanted him 100 years ago. But
right.
The white people were all about him.
Yes.
In other words, he was fawned and flattered. And so basically what we're doing is we're reaching back into, centuries old conflict and dredging those things up. And I don't want to say that they're all entirely gone because obviously generations and peoples have long memories. But the thing that's crucial about this is that you have to also factor in addition to different experiences and different backgrounds, where if the other person loves Jesus and you love Jesus, you can ruffle one another's feathers and work it out.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons why even among Reformed evangelicals and blacks who are Reformed evangelicals and whites who are afraid of them, afraid to say the wrong thing. Everybody's afraid to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
What happens is something happens, somebody throws down, and then there are a bunch of people that don't think that really. But if you're black and you don't think that, and you say that you don't, you're going to pay a price.
Boy,
right?
tell me about it.
All right. If you're white,
that's why you're in Moscow, Idaho.
Are you hiding here?
I'm hiding with Voddie until we get our black cards back.
If you're white and you say something politically incorrect, you're a racist, bigot, hater. If you're black and you say something, let's wait till the jury hears everything. You're a compromiser. You're an uncle.
You're not down for the cause.
You're an Uncle Tom. You're
not really black.
That's right.
You're not genuinely black. You're an Oreo. And so you're.
And Voddie had to adopt 7 African American kids and move to Zambia to keep his black card.
Yeah, well.
that's not black enough.
Yeah, that's not black enough. No, that's not.
So what's necessary is courage.
Right.
What's lacking is courage. So people are deathly afraid of being misunderstood or misrepresented or attacked, and they don't want to lose their friendships or the contacts or their conference invitations or whatever. And so everybody's cowed because they're afraid to get it out on the table and wrestle it out, work it out.
But what about Tabidi? Like, I think some of these people aren't cowed. They aren't afraid. They actually.
You want to pick that name up? We're just dropping names all over the place.
Just dropping them.
Tabidi. Notice they didn't try to say his last name.
No. And but some of these leaders, I think, are playing identity politics or tending to put forward identity first before scriptural principles, like I see Tabidi doing. I guess I'm just kind of challenging the narrative that some black people are just scared to say it, but I think some of them aren't scared to say it.
Well, scared to say what? No, the point is, when Tabidi does that, he's not going to be attacked as someone who's betraying his people.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right? So if someone says...
and we're talking about him saying he's going to vote for Hillary, like that kind of thing?
Right, that kind of thing.
Talking about?
Yeah. He's not going to be attacked. But if he were going to say, let's say he came out for Ted Cruz or something. Donald Trump is a whole problematic other set of issues. Yeah. But let's say he came out for someone who's...
or for Ben Carson.
Let's say someone who's on the right.
Yeah.
He would pay a heavy, heavy price.
Yeah.
So the point is that if you're not going along with the progressivist, leftist agenda, the Marxist agenda, if you're not going along with it, then you're somehow a race traitor. If you are white and you're not going along with it, you're a throwback to Bull Connor.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to the Jamar Tisby thing that you brought up. Is this Voddie when he says like you don't understand my experience? Is that one of those places where he's kind of throwing up something that you just can't answer? Like there's no right answer. Because if you don't have his experience, you don't share his experience, you don't understand how he feels with Trump being elected.
That's my invincibility cloak.
Right. Because now you can't say anything.
Yeah.
Because you don't have his experience.
You don't have
It's like the feminist movement.
But that's not what I don't think that's what he's absolutely after, though, right? I think he's trying to say, I'm trying to be in fellowship with you. I want to engage with you, but you'll treat me like I'm crazy if I actually come out and express this to you. Now, I think there's a whole nother sin there, but I don't think he's trying to hide behind...
Just like I'm treating you as crazy for the way you voted.
Well, and I would even say, so what? Isn't it your responsibility, if you're the mature brother, to be engaged with them and help them understand?
Right.
Like, if it's true that there's something that they're not getting, which is possible in a situation where we're simple people, we don't see what another person of another race goes through.
And we do have different stories.
And we do have different stories.
Right. Yeah.
Why not be the one then to go in and say, hey, brother, look, let me show you where this is missing. Not to pull away and say, I don't want to be with you.
And I'm afraid of you.
And I'm afraid of you. Because isn't that also ascribing ill motives to our brothers?
Absolutely.
Because there are people who voted for Donald Trump for myriad reasons. Okay. And so to assume that, anybody who did that has to be this kind of person with this kind of motive. Again, that's ascribing an ill will to people that, I may disagree. And I was open about my disdain for for Donald Trump as a person.
You voted for Hillary?
And I was also open about my disdain for Hillary Clinton.
I was trying to get a beat on you.
When people in Zambia would come and they'd be like, "Hey, you're American, right? Your election. What do you?" I'm like, for me, it's like Dumb and Dumber. You know? I'm never been so glad to live in Zambia. But my point is, there are some people who they're like, man, this Supreme Court nomination, they would agree on a lot of the stuff that maybe Jamar was even worried about. But for them, there are these, single issue voters, and they going, this is the thing,
We talked to Alveda King. We interviewed her on this show, and that was her story.
Yeah.
She said, I'm just voting for him because he says he's going to appoint a pro-life justice.
And there's a wall.
Yeah. Or if you are a farmer in South Texas, and people are traipsing across your property as they come into the country illegally, and you're afraid for, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That you may be going, ooh, that wall thing? Yeah, let's do that.
Right.
Again, there are myriad reasons that people were moving in that direction. So I think, to come back and say, anybody who did that is somebody that, I need to be afraid of because, they're not thinking appropriately, of me as their brother.
Well,
that's fundamentally, that's a denial of the power of the gospel.
Yeah.
Right? When we say, the Bible says that we are all made in the image of God. We came from the same parents. We're part of the same race.
One race, many ethnicities.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's the one blood of Jesus that washes us clean. It's the one Spirit that unites us. Right? Yeah. Hey.
This is a question.
Oh, okay. I thought you were giving me 5.
No, not yet. I agree with that. Why doesn't it look like that on Sunday mornings?
Well, that's
like what?
Let me.
Go ahead, Pastor. Do it. Tag.
Oh, you give him 5.
Yeah, I was tagging him in.
That's because
I'm not going to give you any beer.
That's because where I'm.
They still haven't got any beer.
Love your brother.
That's because of where I'm.
And I think it's interesting too that y'all put the beer in front of the Baptists
On purpose. I want to see if you're going to partake with this or you're going to break fellowship.
What about that one blood?
So when someone says, "Why doesn't your church look this way?
Yeah.
Why isn't it ethnically diverse?" Am I allowed to ask if the church is in northern Finland?
Absolutely.
So why on earth would a church in the chimney of Idaho have to look like a church would look if in Brooklyn or in L.A.? There are cosmopolitan places, and there are places that are not cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
And if you have racially segregated churches that are deliberately segregated, in other words, you can't come.
Right.
That's a gospel issue. So we won't let you come because of your ethnic background or your tribe or whatever. That is rebellion or disobedience from Scripture. But if it just happens that 90% of the people, and if you encounter black people here in Moscow, they're usually playing basketball for the U of I.
Or WSU.
Or they're an engineering student from Nigeria.
Yeah.
Right.
Or they're making movies.
Yeah, come on.
That's okay. I don't feel left out.
I said, I use the word usually. Then there's unusual. So
it's okay. I got thick skin.
So
how's your sanctification doing over there?
There you go. You asked for it.
So I have a point here that I'm laboring to get to. So I wanted to go back to what Toby said about the power of the gospel.
Yeah.
And when we talk about race issues, almost always it breaks down into cultural issues and what whites have done in history, what whites think they have done, what blacks have done, what we accuse one another of doing. Mm-hmm. What does this culture do? What does that culture do? And so on. But if we're Christians, we ought to be thinking in the first instance, what did Jesus do? Mm-hmm. What did the gospel do? What will the gospel do? Mm. Right? So if you look at one culture the way Europe was 750 years ago, and you look at what the gospel did to Europe, And then you go to some place like Africa and you say something like, but that could never happen here, right? The cathedrals and the symphony orchestras and the glorious, all of that couldn't happen here. You're saying, so you mean to say that Jesus couldn't do that here?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's fundamentally what you're saying. And so the theological assumption, the distortion of two kingdoms teaching, which is that Jesus backs away from all cultural achievement. He has no cultural impact. When we've accepted that assumption that the gospel has no cultural impact, that the gospel doesn't transform peoples and nations and tribes, then when you look at Europe, if Jesus didn't do it, then the white people did do it. Right? If it's so in 1 Corinthians.
I'm sorry. It was a good time. It was a good time. Y'all know it's a good time. Y'all feel like clapping.
Yeah. That happened to me one time before on this show.
It just freaks you out every time.
It admittedly throws me.
Just tag Voddie in. He knows what to do.
So why? Because I'm black? You saying that because I'm black?
Yes, what I'm saying.
Voddie's foot started tapping.
His hand went up.
So if you say, basically, you have to say this is a gift. Every cultural improvement is a gift of the gospel.
Amen.
Yes.
Right? So if there's genuine progress, if it's really progress, then it's really from God. If it's not really from God, then it's not really progress. It's not really something we want. If it's something we want, we should want to share it. If we're all descended from Adam, it's shareable because the gospel is something we're commanded to preach to every creature. If they're moving around and breathing and talking and walking, then the gospel comes to them. And then after 300 years of that, you go into a tribe of cannibals in South America, or you go into some really backward place. And if you say Jesus could never do a mighty work here culturally, well then how did he manage to do it in Northern Europe?
Right.
So how do we go? How do we get here? How do we get there from here?
Exactly. And I believe that. And I want that. I'm just trying to figure out, how we get there. Because when I go like here, of course, I don't expect to walk into our church and see 30 black families chilling, waiting for service. That's not our cultural makeup here.
Well, it's because you're always late, though.
Hey, Gabe, how do you know I'm late? Oh, yeah, that's right.
We're coming together, man. 9:05.
Beam out your own eye, bro. Log out the sign.
Right after confession of sin, I walk in.
I make it in for confession of sin. I gotta get there for that. But I don't expect to see that here. But when I go to inner cities like Minneapolis, Atlanta, Georgia, California, and I'm there and I see that most divided hour in our time is 11 o'clock where race is split off and everybody's separated. Yeah. And no matter what church you're going to, you don't see a mixed culture, a mixed group of people who are surrounded. Actually, they're driving an extra 35, 40 minutes away to search for their cultural preferences.
Right. And in that sense, it's not even, it's manifest somewhat in skin color. You see that. But we're talking about cultural differences,
cultures usually follow a lot of those.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But you walk in and you can either feel at home or not quite feel at home.
Right.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it not be a skin issue.
Well, but I'm saying you would, I would go into an inner city black church that's mostly black. And I know that I love Jesus with them.
Yeah.
And I would do everything I could, but I know there would still be things about it that I'd be like, I am still very, very white.
well, and this, I think it goes further than that.
I didn't know it until I got here. I have never been whiter than I am at this moment right now.
So that's what it means to live in
But it pushes it to the point of I can't fellowship with them because of that.
Right, which is...
And I think that's happening a lot in our churches. I love you guys. You guys are awesome. You love Jesus. We believe the same thing, but there's no way I could spend 2 hours with you guys in the same room.
Well, let me put a metaphor to this. When I was thinking about this topic and we were talking about it.
I like it when he says he's going to do a metaphor.
I'm not very good at them. I'm from Texas. So.
Watch it. Voddie's from Texas, too.
That's my fault.
Actually, I'm from
California. Los Angeles.
I am the worst kind of Texan, man. I'm a Texan by choice.
Oh, brother.
That means he did it on purpose.
That means he has a gun on him right now.
Just packing. I feel like I think a good metaphor that kind of helps me kind of at least process some of this is thinking about like a challenging marriage where they're using some of the same language, they're getting offended, they come from the same blood in Christ, and yet they still are having a hard time being able to deal with the issues between them. And a lot of it has to do with some language, some sin, some assumptions.
Voddie, would you hand me one of those?
You want a beard?
Yeah. Grab one for yourself, too.
All right. Grab one.
Go ahead, Gabe. Go ahead, Gabe. Go ahead.
There you go. And so, all these layers are there. Everything from actually real sin to communication challenges to assumptions in each other's where they're coming from and all that. And I feel like that's kind of part of what seems to me kind of challenging in all this is that there is some real sin, there is some just real communication issues that we just need to get over. And
so if we run with that metaphor, though, I mean,
please, someone take it from here. I'm running out of words.
I was going to let you just kind of trail off for a while,
and then
but the answer then is, I mean, you have to live together. Right. I mean,
exactly.
Right. I mean,
that's right.
But
we don't want to.
You have to live together.
Except that here's where the analogy breaks down. When you marry someone, you've chosen to live together with them for life. You make a covenant, and you're obligated to work it out. When we're dealing with hundreds of thousands of Christians, millions of Christians all over the world, let's say a bunch of Koreans come to the States. Is it a sin for them to form a Korean-speaking church?
Well,
right?
Well, no. Actually, this happened in Georgia. Right now, the PCA church, they have another branch just for the Korean church. And they're not just speaking Korean there, but they don't want to be a part of the white church there in Georgia.
Right. So is it a sin to move to another country with a bunch of your people and want to keep your ethnic identity alive? And do the church potlucks have anything to do with that? Do you want your kids to hear, is it a sin? Is there an ethical obligation, a mandate that says thou shalt racially mix at every opportunity? I don't see that in the Bible. I see that you're prohibited from setting up artificial barriers.
Yeah.
Right. So if,
it's like get the American flag out of your church kind of barriers.
You ought not to, exactly. You ought not to set up barriers where if someone for various reasons marries into your circle or he wants to come, it's close to where he lives and he's the one Dutch guy in the Korean church, and he wants
right.
Yeah. So,
but that's not,
that's fine. He should be welcome and embraced. But if we're chasing people and we're saying, churches that have a similar ethnic background are prohibited.
What if we flip it around though and say, okay, it's not a sin, but isn't the command to love your neighbor? Doesn't that create a certain kind of gravity though, that's pulling you out towards the people you live near? Doesn't that create a kind of gravity? I mean, they're next door to you. You're going to have them over for dinner. When you take them to dinner, you got to be able to talk to them. You got to know their needs. I mean, that creates a certain kind of gravity that's pulling you towards them outside of yourself. And it seems like over time, just that commandment to love your neighbor, it's not going to obliterate cultures and I can't talk anymore, ethnicities, but it's going to, but I think it's going to break through some of those barriers, right?
There's something wrong when I'm driving an extra 45 minutes out of my way past other good churches because I'm finding the one with the people that match my culture. Right? Like, there's good churches right there, but you don't want to go there because of, well, they don't match me.
Well, what do you mean when you say they don't match?
But is
racially, culturally.
Culturally,
they're too white for me.
They talk white or they look white.
I want to go to a church. I want to go to a church, and this is. So there's a Reformed church in Georgia that I love, but the people there are going to the church because guess what? They get to see 8 black elders stand up at the front of the church, and it's such a powerful thing when I see 8 black men standing up there in suits. And that's why I'm there, because the majority of the elders there are black, and that's powerful. That's the reason you're picking a church?
Right.
Why y'all looking at me like I'm crazy? There's a sin issue going on here somewhere where our preferences are overriding the gospel.
An idolizing.
And idolizing something else. But that's not the church. We're not picking churches because of our race. We're picking churches because if I had to pick a church because of my race, I wouldn't be here.
What do you do if you're not picking a church because of race? You're picking a church because at that church, at fellowship hour for the last 2 years running, every conversation is totally awkward.
Yeah, that's right. That's what Jamar Tisby's talking about.
Right.
That's exactly what Jamar's talking about.
Right. So the point I'm making is that fellowship, cross-cultural fellowship, is hard work.
And I get to avoid it?
It's very hard work. You know this in Zambia. It's cross-cultural fellowship is hard work.
And the great thing, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to this conversation, and the reality is we are having that same difficulty, but all the players are still black. Right?
It's a cultural issue.
It's a cultural issue.
Yeah.
It's a cultural issue. And we are having to sort of get over ourselves to figure out how to function and assimilate in this cultural context that is foreign to us.
Yeah.
But everybody's skin is black.
Yeah.
And so it's more than just people's
But to push
color.
that further,
No, but I'm uniting two different things. I get that. But at this point, for what we're dealing with, those two are combined, culture and race right now. And you used to go to Atlanta. Come on now. Black Mecca, right?
But even in Atlanta, the chocolate city, right?
Yeah.
So in Atlanta,
you have called that?
Yeah.
Yeah. In Atlanta, you have black people who drive past a number of black churches to go to another black church.
They're classes.
45 minutes away, right?
Yeah.
And so
in the same way that white people do the same thing.
In the same way, yeah. So we can't just assume that when somebody is driving past churches to get to another church, that it has to mean that there is something wrong with them in terms of, them being racist or whatever. Because it happens. It happens here. There are white people in Idaho who drive 45 minutes and pass a number of predominantly white churches in order to get to another predominantly white church. Because we don't just look for proximity when we're looking for a church. We're looking for connection on a multitude of levels.
Sure.
When we find a church.
I want to add a layer to this because
we needed another layer.
We do, yeah.
It's an onion, baby.
One of the things that you continually hear in all this is that there's a real systematic oppression of black people in our
That's true.
That's
totally true.
So in white
that we hear that,
and this is one of the charges is that white people can't see it, they can't feel it, they can't identify it. Right? Also true.
Also true.
And I was in college. I played college basketball, and I was the only white guy on my team. And I experienced a lot of this stuff with my black brothers getting pulled over by cops, and because they're just black. David has told me stories before. Whether David was right or not, I wasn't there.
That's the problem I have right there. See, that's Jamar Tisby. I got to go to church with this guy who thinks that it was right for me to get pulled over twice.
That was a microaggression.
Thank you.
But my point is there's a charge that there's a real systematic problem in the U.S. that at some level is oppressing black people. I read your response to the Ferguson article on that, and you seem to turn that systematic problem on your own black race.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do, because here's the thing for me, and this is what a lot of people didn't understand, didn't want to understand. This goes back to our experiences and the way that we analyze things and bring those to bear. And so for me, for a variety of reasons, one thing that has been overwhelmingly present for me has been this issue of fatherlessness and the fruit of fatherlessness. I mean, you look at the books that I've written over the years. I've been clanging that gong for a long time.
That's right.
Okay. And so when I'm looking at things and when I'm interpreting them and when I'm responding to them, there is this, automatic tendency for me to bring to bear that thing that's been at the forefront for me for a long time. And so I see fatherlessness, again, 72% of all black babies are born out of wedlock in America. That's huge. All right. And when you want to talk about the number one indicator of future incarceration, future poverty, dropping out of school, violence, again, all of these things, they come together right there, at that issue. And so when I addressed this issue, I went at it from that perspective and from that angle. And what a lot of people were upset about was when I used the phrase of, him reaping what he sowed, because he committed an act of violence, right? Yeah. And then
Michael Brown.
Michael Brown. He committed an act of violence when he robbed the store. He committed another act of violence with Officer Wilson, and he died in an act of violence, But of course, it was just people just, so you believe in capital punishment for robbing a store, and you believe in, it was just, again.
I saw it on an anonymous blog.
Yeah.
So let me pile in
all that kind of stuff. So again, this is the point that I was making earlier. It can't be that, I have a legitimate perspective and was bringing something to bear because of the way that I, look at things. Especially, I have 7 sons.
Yeah.
7 black sons, right? And so it can't just be that. It must be that I just don't get it. And I'm just, sort of not with my people, so to speak. And that's what's really just, that's what's troublesome.
Let me chase the systemic point, because I would amen everything that was said here. Yeah. If you look at the illegitimacy rate among blacks today and the way it was, let's say, between the 2 world wars,
before 65.
Before 65. Yeah. This high rate of illegitimacy came from somewhere. It's not endemic to being black. It's not endemic to, you can't point to slavery. Thomas Sowell shows wonderfully, marvelously, that in the decades following slavery, following emancipation, the black family was intact, thriving together.
Yes. Way better than now.
It was way better than now.
Way better.
And so the destruction of the black family in America was not accomplished by slavery, not accomplished by white racism. And so the question is, what did it?
White legislation.
It was, I would say, the quintessential nature of white legislation is called liberalism. Oh. So is there a systemic problem with whiteness in America? Yes, it's called liberalism. And so what do they do? In the inner city, if you're a young black girl and you get pregnant, what happens is the government comes in and they will pay you to not get married. Yeah. Right? They said, all right, the father of this child has got a job sweeping out a warehouse. He can't pay you the way we can pay you. If you marry the father of this child, then you forfeit all these benefits. We will pay you, bribe you, give you all sorts of benefits. And then we're shocked when we get more of what we subsidize. So basically, yes, I think liberalism, leftist liberalism, nothing is whiter than American liberalism.
Oh, man.
So it's whiter than the Pope's knees.
You have a problem with whiteness? Now whiteness is wrong.
And to add that, Chuck Staben, the president of the University of Idaho, when he was living in Kentucky, he bought a house, and on the deed of the house he bought, it basically said you cannot go and sell your house to someone of the black community.
Right.
So there's this, not only is it like legislation from up on high, but it's like in the neighborhoods where they're creating basically zoning restrictions and creating neighborhoods for
up on C Street here in Moscow, and the conditional use permit for, they had, we looked at a house up there, Nancy and I did, and there was, a restriction on selling it to Chinese people. So basically, people are sinners, and they've had a hard time getting along with each other for forever. And the only thing that can address that is the gospel. And Jesus does this over time. He sanctifies us not all at once. He works with us patiently, and so we should expect the gospel to work through like leaven in the loaf.
Yes.
We must not be impatient.
Yes.
So if white legislation has been part of the systematic problem, black fatherlessness has been part of the systematic problem.
I want to add a third person in there. Reformed doctrine has also been a problem. Like, let's not act like we had.
Oh, that was the wrong answer.
There we go.
Oh, now I'm in trouble.
That's the wrong answer.
All right, am I in church discipline? Listen, I mean, Dr. Baucham, it's a
Where's
blessing.
your organ now?
Reformed theology has been a problem. Oh, yeah. Okay. No, but I mean. But, I mean, when Dr. King was trying to go to seminary, he couldn't get into a Reformed conservative seminary. Right? I think, Tony Evans was one of the first, if you want to call this, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. If you want to call Reformed, DTS, if you want to call it Reformed, Dr. Baucham, can we get an audible no?
It's on camera.
No.
Okay. But he was the first well-known doctor that I can think of our generation. Now we have you, Doc. A black doctor, right? Theological doctor. So there's not like, I think conservative Christians gave up a lot of influence they have in black culture.
But that wasn't just Reformed people.
No, it was no. But that was
fundamentalist.
That was conservative. But the liberals.
Well, what David's trying to do is kind of get the log out of our eye.
Well, the liberals were the ones who said, "Well, you want to go to school? Come over here." Yeah. So when we look at black theology now, it's been taught by liberalism. And it's just now starting to make a turn back to conservative theology, and we're starting to see a little bit of rift.
No, I'm saying I agree with you, but to say that it's Reformed theology, that's what.
No, right. Yeah. I think though they were just as bad. You got Presbyterians in the they weren't Bible Belt.
But my point is that it's
everybody.
Yes,
it's a people. It's a people.
Yeah,
but liberalism was the one who opened the door. Liberal seminaries were the ones who said, "Well, come in."
Yeah,
and so it wasn't just. White liberals. It wasn't just at a time when conservative Christians had a chance to step up and claim something and say, oh, there's a people group out here that we can influence with the gospel. Oh, here goes a whole mission field. Like we dropped the ball. Notice I said we.
But notice, but if you take what Doug said a minute ago and you apply it to the seminary thing, I mean, what you have driving it then is a certain kind of white paternalism.
Right.
We'll take care of you.
We're a statist paternalism. That's what white liberalism is. That's paying these single moms not to marry the fathers of their children. That's maybe driving even some of the zoning stuff. That's sort of keeping people in certain places.
Yeah.
But then add to that,
starting institutions on the continent of Africa that don't respect black people and give them an education just a little bit above Sunday school.
Yeah.
And then certify them as pastors and wonder why. We have the huge problems that we have with syncretism and everything else. Just need to add that.
But all the American liberal institutions that are saying come over here, they're not doing it because they're actually going to teach them the gospel.
Right. No. Yeah.
They're doing it because it's more paternalism that's going to give them a little bit of
I agree with that. I'm just saying that we had the opportunity.
Sure.
And we just didn't.
So basically, it's virtue signaling. When you had conservatives who just rejected, we don't want you, don't want your kind. The liberals opened up the doors of the seminary because they wanted to feel good about themselves. They felt guilty about the past.
Sure.
There was all sorts and there's things to feel guilty about. But if we're careening from the last bad thing we did, that's not acting. My dad taught me that we should always act, never react. If you react, you're gonna just make another mistake.
Right.
Yeah.
We should look at a mess. If we've got a mess, we have to look at it and say, what does the Bible say? What does the Bible teach a pastor or an elder session or a seminary dean? What does the Bible teach us to do in this situation?
Yeah.
Right. So you're a conservative. Seminary guy, and the first black applicant applies, but his grades aren't good enough.
Yeah.
What does the Bible say to do? Right. Do you want to do the right thing, or do you want to look like you did the right thing?
Absolutely, do the right thing.
Yeah, you want to do the right thing, and that circles back to courage, because the world, the flesh, and the devil don't want you to do the right thing.
What's the right thing in that situation?
In that situation, you look at it and say, the educators can't put in what God left out. So if you have to look at this and say, could this guy make it with help?
Right.
Could we work with this?
Yeah.
And if you could, then the goal of fixing your institution's problem is a higher goal than maintaining an arbitrary line.
Right.
If you want to just, he's black and he's 98.6 and he showed up and we want a trophy, right?
Yeah.
Then
that.
It just, well, see, and what that does.
Token diversity.
I hate that.
Token diversity, because what that does is that, an accomplished, talented black person doesn't want an asterisk by every genuine accomplishment that he makes. Am I an affirmative action case, or did I actually do this? Was this God's blessing on me, or was this somebody trying to assuage his white guilt? So
money.
And this goes back to the first point about the honest conversation. Yeah. You want to have a conversation where the white people and the black people who are talking to each other are saying what they each believe to be true.
Right.
And the other side knows that they're hearing the truth,
right?
Not hearing flattery,
right? Yeah. And just for the record, I will take all white guilt that I can. I don't have a problem taking any white guilt. And let me tell you.
There's plenty of it.
I'm trying to gobble it all as much as I can get. But what I mean by that is, so like you're saying, I've been in that situation before where I didn't qualify for the job. It wasn't that I couldn't learn the skills to be able to do the job, right? But any conservative any conservative I would have tried to go work for, I couldn't get hired.
Right.
They will not break that standard, right?
Right.
And because there's a standard there, they want everybody to be the same. That is their positioning. Well, a liberal, when I went in to get the job, I didn't pass the test. She filled out all the answers for me on the test, and I got the job because she did that. Now, it just so happened that
you could learn.
I was grateful and could learn and became the best employee she had.
Right.
But I know it's not the case all the time, but I needed that in order to be able to get somewhere else. So I identify with people saying, if I can just get a chance, if I can just get my foot in the door somehow, if I can just get there, I promise you, I'll make it worth your time. Right. I'll give everything I have. So I think I like having the standard, but there's also times where people who are able to do it are not always there.
But isn't that just love? I mean, when we love each other, when the body of Christ embodies what we're called to do.
Well,
we look at one another, and we are to without being unjust, without lying, without being virtue signaling, and so
sure.
on. You look at somebody and you say, hey, you're not good enough yet. You didn't pass the test, but you know what? I do see that you're a hard worker. I do see that you're honest. I do see potential here, and I'm willing to pour myself into you. And we do that across the board in different ways. Not even just.
And if you're on the admissions committee, those are tough. How do I tell the difference between a guy who just needs a chance and a guy who's a slacker? Well, and making the wrong call is not racism. These are difficult.
Sure.
And what you don't do is fill out the test form. You can.
Wait, hey!
That was wrong, David. Have you repented of that?
Hey,
she could be doing.
Fill out the test for me.
but the point is, she could be doing the right thing the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right? So she could be doing the right thing and saying, I see a lot of potential in him, and then she cheats on the test for you.
Because the end doesn't justify the means.
Right.
Yeah.
It did in that case, Voddie. I got a job. Worked for 3 years, made good money.
You weren't
for my family.
You weren't there.
I mean, I'm just saying, you could take away those 3 years, I wouldn't have had a job.
You just don't understand his experience.
You don't understand my experience.
Yeah. Are we going to do some questions?
Yeah. Before we do, though, Gabe brought up a question that I thought was really interesting. He wanted to ask each one of you, in the race issue, the culture, the Christian issue, what are some of the sins? I want to switch it. He wanted to give you this question. What are some of the white sins in the topic of race and culture and church? Where they fell in it? But I think the question should go to Voddie, that question, and you answer the other question. So you're asking, what are some of the black sins?
Okay.
In the issue.
And the reason why is because we've heard.
You don't think I'm in enough trouble?
Oh, man. Well, you do so good in trouble. Adversity is like one of those things you grow at. You're just good at it.
Because also the reason why is I've read a lot of both y'all's writings on this issue, and you both take the log out of your own eye with your own race, I think, pretty well. And so we wanted this to be a shot in the other direction and have a good opportunity to speak into our lives about, hey, what do you think the white people need to hear from Voddie on this, and vice versa with Doug? So.
we're trying to use that sanctification we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And are you talking historically or right now?
Right now.
Right now.
Right now. But I think ties in a little bit historically too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I find it difficult to talk about this without a hat tip or an acknowledgement of what I think the essential white sin, the central white sin in all of this is, which is to confuse the grace of God and the gospel with their own merit. So 1 Corinthians 4:7, what do you have that you did not receive as a gift? And if as a gift, then why do you boast as though you did not? So whites have attributed to their whiteness, to their race, to their descent, the accomplishments that are actually given to them by as fruit of the gospel downstream.
And that's seen in white nationalism, concentrated white nationalism.
Correct.
Yeah,
so that's, and I think that's a besetting human sin. The Jews fell into that trap. Paul saw the Romans starting to fall into that same trap and warned them about it. You don't support the tree, that, the root supports you, not the other way around. I think it's a besetting human sin, and I believe that white Christian culture has been very guilty of it. And I think that because of that, what happened, the complicated system came up where there was a great deal of abuse of blacks by whites that was justified in their minds by this rationalization. Then when guilt caught up with them and they had this situation, whites tried to appease their guilt by flattery, affirmative action, double standards, etc. So I would say the besetting sin now, generally among blacks, is accepting that offering and letting a sense of entitlement develop, where you owe me. You owe me because of 300 years ago. You owe me because of this. I'll take it. And then what that does is that creates I think that has the effect of crippling black achievement, crippling black enterprise. It results in the fatherlessness. There's all sorts of problems where that are endemic to black culture in North America today that I think is the result of being unwilling to break with whites trying to buy them off. I think that whites should just seek forgiveness and quit trying to buy people off. And I think that blacks need to start rejecting the plantation owners that are keeping them in bondage.
I'm sorry, what'd you say? Well, and I think that's a new idea too, the fact that you owe me. When I go back and I look at early black culture, 1921, Black Wall Street in Tennessee or in Oklahoma, it seems like at that time, especially, black culture just wanted to be left alone.
Right.
Like, just leave me alone. You don't have to come see me. I will build industry. We'll sell amongst ourselves. Just leave me alone. And now it's turned to give me what you have.
Right. And there's a shakedown. There's race hustlers. The Al Sharptons and Jesse Jacksons are race hustlers. They shake down corporations. They say, we demand it. We'll make life miserable for you if we don't get it. And whites are too cowardly to stand up to that sort of thing. And I believe that the sense of entitlement and grievance, even though there are many sins to be forgiven from blacks to whites, you can't make sin go away by making people pay something other than the blood of Jesus.
Amen. Yeah.
Wow, that's good. That's good. Your turn.
So I think, the major sin with white people is, like, if a black person is told he's going to get to answer this, then they answer it first anyway. So
white people always stealing stuff.
Yeah,
That's the Indians.
They're always stealing stuff.
Clinton down there like,
So,
that's right.
That's one.
Yeah.
But
I got you. That's real.
I'd rather be in trouble with you guys than with the entire internet.
Yeah. All of the interwebs together, huh?
We get in trouble for just being around you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So this phrase, and I don't even know where it originated, but the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yeah.
I think that is a huge issue. And I think it manifests itself ironically with what I see as the new and latest iteration of white supremacy. Mm-hmm. So white supremacy, you go back to the 19th century and Darwinianism, and you have white supremacy based on this evolutionary idea. White people are superior because they evolved in a superior manner. Black people are from lower primates, so on and so forth. Before that, you had white supremacy based on this bastardization of biblical text. This curse of Cain, and we're superior because God put you in this inferior position. Today, the latest iteration of white supremacy is actually backhanded white supremacy called white privilege.
Right.
So what white privilege does is it allows white people to say, I am superior to you, but it's just because I've had more privileges than you. It's still white supremacy, mind you.
And I'm sorry for it, but I'm going to.
Yeah. I feel really bad for my superiority, but So it is actually the latest iteration of white supremacy. And the horrible thing about it is that there are white people who are now spouting and embracing white supremacy and breaking their arms, patting themselves on the back because, they're checking their privilege, right?
Right.
So that would be like the Darwinian guy going, yeah, you're evolved from inferior primates, but, I'm going to check my evolutionary privilege. Or, the Bible, God did curse you, and I'm really sorry for you because of that, but, I'm going to check my biblical privilege, So now, again, it's just another iteration of white supremacy, and you've got evangelicals all over the place, who are spouting this, white privilege mumbo jumbo, not realizing where it came from, that it's another instance of cultural Marxism, and that it comes along with male privilege, American privilege, able-bodied privilege, straight privilege, right? There's a whole list. There's a whole litany.
You don't have any friends, do you?
No, I ain't got no friends.
You don't have any friends.
I had to go to Zambia to have friends, man.
And if there is such a thing as privilege, then notice what check your privilege means. It means we want you to take that talent and go bury it in the ground in a napkin.
Right.
Right. If you really have privilege, then use it to love your brothers.
Right. Turn it into some profit.
Come on now.
Turn a profit on it.
Amen.
But if you say check your privilege, because hiding in that is egalitarianism. We want to level everything. You've got to check your privilege. You have to be smug in your superiority, but check your privilege by pretending you're not superior. I'll just agree not to behave that way. Yeah. Instead of saying, God has given me these gifts, these resources. How can I love my people? Right. How can I love my brothers?
Yeah.
It's
Amen.
It's the age old illustration of cutting off the heads of corn.
Yes.
These heads of corn are taller than the other heads of corn. Well, we'll cut them off so that all the heads of the corn are the same size, and that's how we'll have equality.
We got to mind that.
And it's it's interesting. What's interesting about that, and this is what bothers me about this: Black people thrive and achieve in meritocracies. Mm-hmm. We don't ask for handouts in the music industry, and we thrive. We don't ask for handouts in the NBA, and we thrive.
That's right.
Yeah.
We don't ask for handouts in the NFL, and we thrive. When Black people say, no matter what, we're going to thrive. And then we say, here's what gets me, and here's what gets me. Because I went to a predominantly Black high school. And here's what gets me. Academically, we say, oh, well, New St. Andrews, I don't know if I can make it at a place like that because, we had an inferior school and our school didn't have this and our school didn't have that. Right. You know what? When we went and played the white teams, we're like, okay,
game on.
They got better equipment. They got better uniforms. They got better shoes. They got better coaches. And we are going to anyway.
Bad voting.
Okay. But that was our attitude. Our attitude was, it doesn't matter that you have more.
Yeah.
We will rise up and get you. Okay, but then academically, we turn around and it's we don't have the same books and we don't have this same and we don't have this, No, that's not my people. That's not where I came from, and so that's why for me, when I look at these issues, I'm saying, what is it that we have that we can control that will change things for us? Listen, if laws could somehow be manipulated so that black people, no longer get shot by cops, we'd still have 72% of our children being born out of wedlock, and that would still be our biggest problem. Wow. We would still have as many black babies aborted as born, and that would still be a bigger problem. So it's not that I'm not concerned about these issues, but the problems that we face are much larger than these problems that end up on the front page.
Yeah, that's right.
There are so many of us being slaughtered in the womb.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's a real issue. Yeah. And so are there myriad issues for us to deal with? Yes, there are. But there's some that we can actually do something about in our communities, in our homes, that would transform things. And that's where my focus is.
Amen.
Hey.
Amen.
That's some good stuff.
Yeah.
Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, praise the Lord. We just want to thank everybody for being here. And if you have any questions, there's a mic right down here. You can go ahead and come ask your questions to the...
Can they bring their offerings too?
Bring your offerings. Anybody needs some prayer? We got some elders up here to anoint you with some oil. Thank you, Jesus. Go ahead and make your way up. Don't be shy. We don't mind. We could have answered all the questions.
David, they don't know what to do. They don't know what you're talking about.
All right. Well, guys, look, all you got to do is come up to the microphone. Is that better?
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
This is called altar call music. And so, basically you play this music to get people to slip down the aisle. Yeah. So if you play this, people get happy and it's like, oh, I need something, Lord. I need something.
If you had some Johnny Cash, that might get some people down there.
I don't really do Johnny. I like him, but I usually don't do it.
We got one. We got a bold man talking to the mic.
Okay. Thanks again for having this event. It's been great, and you guys are doing a good job. My question, I heard on a podcast that kind of what you guys mentioned too about forgiveness, especially over things like slavery or segregation in the past. The guy was saying, as far as Christians, we can be kind of trying to see the other point of view and saying, don't just say to people, get over it, or like, this will be easy or something. I mean, it helps if someone's a Christian to deal with the forgiveness, but as far as especially the black community, us being a little more sympathetic and saying, this is very difficult, and forgiveness doesn't just come automatically. And how do we deal with that, of saying this could take some time, God needs to do the work, and we shouldn't be, uncaring about just get over it or something, because we did do some things, and I can't take responsibility for everything that happened in the past, but I need to kind of see that point of view, I guess. And so it's kind of a question.
I would want to start with, we need to take responsibility with where Doug was getting at, right? We need to take responsibility with our liberal legislation that has created a lot of systematic. It's when I've read a lot of Doug and Voddie, they immediately start with the sins of their own people, their own area, their own. You start with the log in your own eye,
and our own generation. So, in other words, if you start dealing with the sins you're committing right this minute, that's going to give you. George MacDonald said that obedience is the great opener of eyes. You start to deal with sin that you're committing now. That's going to give you clarity concerning the sins of 150 years ago. Right. But if you just charge straight to the sins of 150 years ago, the sins of the Middle Passage and all the horrendous things that are done, and then you turn on some white guy whose parents moved here in the 1920s, and you demand that he pay reparations because of the color of his skin, and his grandparents had nothing whatever to do with what happened.
Who's the racist
here
in that situation?
Yeah. In other words, we can't do simplistic analysis. I do believe that we need to put some things right. I do believe that we have to.
I'm in.
Right. But we have,
I'm in. Let's do
We have to put things right, but before we can put things right, we have to get things right.
That's right.
We have to understand it, and we can't just say, "Oh, you're black, you're white, you must owe something to." Right. So when all the blacks were being shuttled from Africa, from the Middle Passage, from West Africa, during the same centuries, the word slave comes from the word Slav. The Slavic people were being enslaved by Africans in the north coast of Africa. There were slave raids as far north as Ireland. As many as 1 million Europeans were taken into slavery to Africa, and Africans were being taken to the New World as slaves. So suppose we went to Libya, suppose we went to Algeria, and we say, we want you to pay reparations to Germany and the Baltic states, and we want you to pay reparations to the Eastern European states because of this historical incidence of slavery.
Yeah.
They would say, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? That's not part of our cultural memory anymore. Well, there's a way of putting things right. There's also a way of keeping things inflamed. And I think we do better at keeping things inflamed than we do at putting things right.
But just to, I hate doing this because I'm getting myself in trouble. Just to speak
No,
to,
you don't. No, you don't.
You're right. I don't mind.
Just saying.
There is.
It's like your black privilege. You're like, I'm sorry.
Is there a such thing?
I'm gonna
I'll take it.
I'm going to take it.
It's invisible.
It's colorless. The reason that I think people are pushing the conversation for reparations is because there is still a value to what was taken that is being lived off of from the people that it was taken from.
Right.
Right. So they would make the argument that your equity that you have is based off of my forefathers building for you or what was taken for the last couple hundred years.
Right.
So, and like you said, there's some things that do need to be put right, but that's the reasoning for it.
And I would say we're not competent to make that calculation. There are millions, hundreds of millions of variables.
Yeah.
And if your parents immigrated here in the 20th century, you don't have to check this box on your income tax.
Right.
If there's just
so because it's too complicated, we shouldn't do it at all.
That's why Jesus came and died on the cross. To cut the Gordian knot.
Amen.
Right. Yeah. He came to put it all right, to forgive, and we need to start treating each other right now.
Yeah.
And then, as God gives wisdom, work our way back. If we start back there, it's going to make a mess.
Amen. And I'm from Texas, and where?
Really?
Yep.
What?
Did I mention I was from Texas? Did I? Yes. And the Aztecs,
one Texan.
The Aztecs owned parts of Texas at once, and then the Indians took it from the Aztecs, and then the Mexicans took it from the Indians, and then the Texans took it from the Mexicans.
They were the Aztecans.
The Aztecs. There we go.
Aztecans.
So at what point do we keep going back and the Texans owe the Mexicans? And
Yes.
Mexicans
Yes, they do.
Yes.
Yes, they do.
Did you steal it?
No, they took it.
Did you take it?
They took it like a man.
It's not yours.
You got to understand what Texans get.
Wait, before we move on to our second question, I do want to say something. Maybe Voddie might jump in on this too, but to the question of just getting over it, and that's not fair to say. And I actually think it is fair to say to just get over it. Look,
that's the gospel, right?
Look, black Christians, you're Christian first, right? You have been redeemed by the blood of Jesus Christ. You have a code that one has forgiven you more than you have forgiven anybody else. Amen. And will continue to forgive you. You don't have the luxury to continue to wallow in your sin and hold on to something. You have the responsibility to forgive on sight.
Yeah, amen.
We have to forgive. That's what I know it's hard, but we have to. We've been forgiven much. We have to forgive much. So we don't have the luxury to not forgive immediately, to not get over it quick.
You can give yourself a little bit of organ if you want.
Like a little organ. Hey!
There's a name.
And I'm going to say this because, again, I'm so used to how these things happen. But there are people who just heard that and they're like, okay, so the next time a shooting happens, we shouldn't hold a person accountable if it was, an illegitimate. And that's not what you are saying.
Thank you.
That's not what you're referring to. But again, you and I both know that there are people out there, and for them, what they just heard was, oh, so, if these kind of atrocities happen, we should just not, that's not what's being said here. Absolutely. We're talking about our relationships with one another in the church as Christian brothers and sisters. So,
Well, that's
But-
what we're
but the
getting back
biggest-
to our very beginning of our conversation, where it's biblical justice.
This brother been standing up here for like 50 minutes.
Yeah, what the heck, you guys?
All right, cut his mic off.
Hey, real quick. Nate helped us get up and going in a lot of ways for CrossPolitic.
He's a little too excited.
Yeah, you guys.
Hey, Nate.
Okay, anyway,
Thanks, Nate.
thanks for coming out, you guys, very much. I wanted to address a point that you brought up earlier, Chuck Knox. So you were talking about diversity within the church and how we need to be pursuing that, right?
Correct.
And my question was, how aggressive do we need to be about that? Because I came up in the A166, the South Seattle.
Gangster?
One of the most, yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
One of the most racially diverse zip codes in the U.S.
Okay.
in an Acts 29 church. And Matt Chandler, the leader of that network, says that we need to be very intentional about getting diversity within the church and making sure that people represent all the demographics in their region.
Yeah.
In my home church, which is an Acts 29 church, in this racially diverse zip code is 150 white people, a black guy, a Mexican, and my Vietnamese brother-in-law. So, is there a problem there?
There's a joke in there somewhere.
Did they walk into a bar?
My dad makes it every weekend. So is there a problem there? And then what is that problem and how do we resolve it?
So I think the first question was, there's like 3 questions there, so help me get to the other 2.
Sorry.
The first one is, how aggressively first of all, should we have racially diverse churches? According to me, I think absolutely. If you're depending on where you're at.
Not for diversity's sake.
And no, for the gospel's sake.
Amen.
Right.
For the gospel's sake.
Right.
If I have a huge passion for the black church, if there is a such thing, before Voddie tackles me. Black church. No such thing as a black church.
Here comes bad Voddie.
It's the church. I knew that was coming. But I have a huge passion to see black churches come to reformed biblical doctrine, mainly Presbyterian, CREC, kind of doctrine. So that's my passion. That's my
He's
heart.
talking about baptizing babies, Voddie.
Yeah, Voddie.
You know what?
Yeah.
Go ahead, jump on it.
Somebody turn Voddie's mic off. And if I could, I would chain everybody up and bring them into the church and say, we're going to get along, we're going to love each other, and we're going to praise Jesus. So that's how hard I want to go after it.
That doesn't work.
I haven't tried it yet. I don't know. I want to fail it that way first before. But I'm serious. If I live in a community where I have South Minneapolis has majority Hispanics, blacks, and Asians, I want my church to reflect the environment that I'm evangelizing to. I don't want my church to just reflect.
But that's because you're going to your neighborhood, not because you're going to a particular race.
Well, but that's
right?
that's my whole point. If I'm in that neighborhood,
absolutely,
then you gotta love your neighbors.
Then I'm loving my neighbors, and my congregation, I hope, looks like that fact that I'm loving the people that are around me.
One of our problems is that we are race obsessed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And so in this situation, I don't know. You've given the scenario, and I know what the racial composition is of this church in a racially diverse zip code area, but I don't know if race is the factor at all, right? I'd want to know something. What's the income level of everybody in your church?
Everybody's middle class.
All right, everybody's middle class. What's the income level of all the racially diverse people in that area?
Ridiculously low.
Okay, so I would bet
Seattle.
All right, so I would be willing to bet you $10 that it has nothing whatever to do with race. And has everything to do with the culture, middle class culture,
Sure.
right? So if you have someone over for lunch, and he says, "Well, I can't have you over because I'm living in a cardboard box," and basically you've got the problems of ministry across economic lines.
Yeah.
Right? Which is another challenging issue. So it sounds to me like there's a problem of outreach and ministry that this church has, but it doesn't sound to me like a racial problem.
Well, yeah, and I hope I'm trying to say that, but that's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying. But I want whatever the environment is in my community, low class, middle class, upper class, whatever environment I'm serving, I want my church to look like that, regardless of race.
Right. So one of the things we've seen in Christ Church, we have a ministry, a number of our deacons and folks are involved with a Meal with Jesus and guys going to prison and coming out of prison and ministry to down and outers. And for them to come to Christ Church, when let's say somebody's converted and they come to Christ Church and we're singing psalms from the 17th century, and we're doing what we believe God has called us to do. We're trying to build this. If they're converted, there are a lot of churches that feel much more conducive to them, where I'm not taken to what you're doing. Thank you for all the help. I know that you love Jesus. I know you love me, and I know that you brought me to the Lord. But there's a barrier.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you are educated at a certain level, and if you live at a certain economic level, and you then try to break into a church where it's upper middle class, there are all kinds of booby traps there for you. And it's just one uncomfortable situation after another. And
leave? Do you leave?
Well, no, what I'm saying is don't confess a racial sin. You don't know.
Right.
You've got a problem.
Sure.
You want to have a ministry to these people and bring them up to speed and help them mature liturgically and doctrinally and everything. You want to minister to them.
Sure.
But it's not going to happen in 3 weeks. It's not going to happen in 3 months.
Yeah.
And I think there's another issue here that needs to be recognized. And let me use a metaphor.
Texas metaphor.
I'm going to use a fishing metaphor. And so, there's a stream, and we got some rainbow trout and some brown trout, brook trout, let's say we got 4 or 5 different kinds of trout in this stream.
Some noodling maybe going on.
And I'm
in the river.
Stop it. And so, we tie on our flies and we get after it, right? And they start hitting, and we have a great day, and we come home and we bring home our catch, and we're gonna cook up some trout. We don't get home and say, what a failure. Almost all of these are rainbows. So here's the connection.
Y'all was lost.
Here's the connection. I live in this community, and there are these kind of people and these kind of people, just like that trout stream, right? Mm-hmm. And what do? I fish.
You fish, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And just like, fishing, there's something happening beneath the water that you don't necessarily see.
Yeah.
When we're fishing for men, there's something happening beneath the skin that we don't necessarily see.
Yeah.
It is the Spirit of God who calls men to
right.
himself. And what I worry about is that with all of this bean counting, as it relates to people's ethnicities and whatever, that God could put us onto a situation where he is pouring out his Spirit right here, and we're seeing fruit from that. And we go home bemoaning the fact that God is saving the wrong people.
Man.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
So I really worry about this obsession of ours with, looking like this or looking like that. Listen, if I'm being a faithful fisherman, I'm glad to catch whatever I catch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Amen.
And I celebrate that.
Unless it's under 12 inches here now.
Unless it's under 12 inches, so again, I think there's danger in this, and so the other thing is, just like, I think Doug just brought this out, there are things that are going to attract certain individuals to certain kinds of places. And if I'm not careful, what I end up doing is compromising my convictions as it relates to, who we are, as a church, in order to, sort of try to have a little bit of everything for a little bit of everybody. And that can be a problem. And I'll end it with this. In our church, Houston is the most ethnically diverse city in the United States. Mm-hmm. Most people don't know that. But it is. 4th largest city in the country, most ethnically diverse city in the country. And so, in our church, we didn't have a lot of different ethnicities in our church until we hit about the 7-year mark. And all of a sudden, God brought people from 11 different countries in 6 months. In 6 months, there are people come from 11 different countries. What's interesting, though, is because we are, a confessional, Second London Baptist Confession, Reformed Baptist Church.
They don't baptize babies.
People, we don't baptize babies. We don't baptize babies. And so people from these other countries, right, what were they looking for? They weren't looking for just a church with people from the country that they came from. They were looking for a confessional church, regulative worship. They were looking for, see, these things that were shared. And so they started coming. So it became much more likely that people from other cultures that shared all these convictions would come and be a part of this church. Amen. Than, us being in the, backyard of Joel Osteen. Most people, when they think about church and worship, that's shaping it. They come into us and they're like, this ain't church. And so, again, I say all that to say, I'm really worried about what I see as an overemphasis in this area,
Hey, that's fantastic. We got to close up shop right there. These kids, their brains are
fried.
They're fried. They've been. Hey, y'all, would you thank us? Would you thank not us? But would you please thank us?
So selfish.
Thank you for thanking us. Thank you for thanking us. Yes, thank you for thanking us.
My brain is mush. Hey. You gonna bring this in?
Yes. So, hey, thank everybody for coming out. We want to thank NSA for having CrossPolitic. We probably will never be back again after this particular show. Thank everybody for listening on Facebook. Find CrossPolitic at CrossPolitic at .com. Well, no, what's the Twitter at CrossPolitic?
CrossPolitic.
Yeah. So they're in
Facebook.
Fight, laugh,
and feast.
We got Dr. Edwards down here. He's going to close us out.
Okay, I'm going to call Dr. Erb up to lead us all in the doxology, so please stand.